I'm speaking with Deborah Weiss. She has been on the air with us previously as one who is on the front lines of dealing with Islamic issues in America. She's an attorney, and she is an expert on Islamist stifling of speech. She's written several books, including The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech and the Council on American Islamic Relations, its use of lawfare and intimidation. Her website, vigilancenow.org. So, Deborah, the moment you then saw the news reports, tell us what you did. Tell us what you were expecting.
I posted on my Facebook that the narrative was going to be this is hate, 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 and they're going to start lumping in, before you know it, homophobia with Islamophobia, like it's all the same thing, and that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, I want you to respond to this clip. This is from CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations. Joey, clip number 13. And again, I'm sure you've seen this coming. It's good that Muslim leaders get up and renounce these things. We call on them to do it. It's good when they do. But let's see if we can read between the lines here. Clip number 13.
You do not speak for us. You do not represent us. You are an aberration. You are an outlaw. Or as we call it in Islam, they are Khawarij. They are outlaws. They don't speak for our faith. They never belong to this beautiful faith. They claim to, but the 1.7 billion people are united in rejecting their extremism, their interpretation, and their acts and senseless violence.
And they also equate elsewhere, CAIR does, Islamophobia and homophobia. So, Deborah, your reaction to that clip?
Right. Well, first of all, you're right, because in another speech, he actually, Nihad Awad, the executive director of CAIR, actually came out and said that you cannot dismantle homophobia without dismantling Islamophobia, and he did. Like, it's all the same thing, which we know it is not. And to the extent that he was condemning it, when he also makes comments that conflate practically the disdain for Islamic terrorism in with the same thing, with being bigoted against gays, you have to really question the sincerity of his comments. Additionally, I want to point out, for those of your audience members who aren't aware, Council on American Islamic Relations spawned out of Hamas and the Islamic Association of Palestine, which are both state-designated terrorist organizations. And for your audience, which I know is Christian and pays a lot of attention to what happens in Israel, you know that Hamas is not a friend of gays, it's not a friend of Christians, and around the world, Islamic terrorist groups, including ISIS, and especially ISIS, and this was an ISIS-inspired attack, has a particular hatred of gays. They hate Jews, they hate anybody that doesn't believe the way they do. So you really have to, if they're apologists, CAIR is an apologist organization with Muslim Brotherhood affiliations. Our government should not be working with them, and our media should not be holding them up as representatives of equality and tolerance.
What about the idea that 1.7 billion Muslims worldwide reject the type of behavior that was carried out in the nightclub?
Well, there are approximately 1.5 or maybe 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, and I'm certainly not saying that everyone who calls themselves a Muslim condones this behavior or hates gay people. Obviously, that's not the case. However, it's also a falsehood to say that all 1.5 or 1.7 billion condemn it, because who do you think constitutes these Islamic terrorist groups? There's tens of, I don't know the exact number, but it's in the millions at least, the tens of millions, that it's the Saudi government, it's the Iran government, it's all the Islamic theocracies, it's Islamic terrorist groups. They all have a particular hatred of gays, and it comes out of their Islamic religion. So some Muslims eschew the violent or intolerant aspects of their own religion. I hate to say it, though, Dr. Brown, it is part of the canonical doctrine, though. And I would like to add just one more thing. It is not a coincidence that this attack was done during Gay Pride Month. This is Gay Pride Month, and it's also Ramadan, which just, makes it twice as good that they overlap this year. And the Islamic terrorist organizations have a particular affinity for committing their attacks on locations that have special symbolic significance and dates and holidays that have special symbolic significance. So the fact that it's Gay Pride Month just makes it that much more notable that the attack was done on this day, to emphasize how the Islamic State feels about gays.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of more questions for you, a bunch more if you can stick around with us. We've got about 2 minutes before the next break, but Dennis Prager written an article, What If the Murder Had Been Christian? And his basic point is, if that person had been Christian, you'd have a lot of Democrats and leftists and others just in blanket ways condemning Christianity.
Yeah.
Whereas because it's a Muslim, you've got to do everything to disassociate this man from Islam. Do you think he's correct?
Probably. I think that there is some obviously anti-Christian sentiment among the media and the left in this country. I will say that the other comment I made on my Facebook, which is the media and the government would, and they are, focusing on two things. One is the target, which is the gays, and the method, which is the guns. So if that's what you're focusing on, then the solution is going to be something to the effect of gay dignity and gun control, and that's what you're hearing. The real focus should be on the perpetrator and not what you speculate his motive is, but what he says his motive is, which was an ISIS Islamic attack, and it's the problem. That's what the problem is. That's what needs to be focused on. Enemy threat doctrine says you cannot win the war unless you properly identify the enemy and name it by name. And to the extent that our president is whitewashing the whole thing, ignoring it, saying it's not important, that is playing into the enemy's narrative. And you will see, unfortunately, Dr. Brown, more of these attacks unless we want to face the enemy face to face and name it what it is.
Yeah, in fact, on the other side of the break, I want to ask you if you have followed the extent to which our law enforcement has been hamstrung. FBI, other intelligence organizations have been hamstrung because the Obama administration does not want certain words, terms used, that Muslim leaders came and said we don't want to be branded a certain way. So it's almost like, someone's hiding in the closet, but that's the one place you're not allowed to look. We'll be right back with Deborah Weiss, her website, vigilancenow.org. Thanks for joining us on The Line of Fire, 866-34-TRUTH. Back to my guest, Deborah Weiss. Deborah, have you followed the degree to which our law enforcement agencies or intelligence agencies have been hamstrung by administrative policies that don't want to recognize radical Islam by name?
I certainly have. That's been quite a lot of my focus, actually, Dr. Brown, and it all stems from it's political correctness and manipulation of the language. It's really newspeak, the way Orwell talked about in 1984. And, because we have religious freedom in this country, I think government officials are afraid to name anything that's related to a religion. But to the extent that Islamic supremacists want to impose their beliefs on others and harm national security, it has a huge political component, and it is an enemy ideology. Muslims who don't embrace that aspect of it shouldn't be offended because policies that would be properly developed and implemented would protect them as well. So, yes, the answer is the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security have all in the last few years under this administration completely rewritten their national security training programs. They've gotten rid of several trainers that they had that were consultants for years and years that would train them on the Islamist ideology that motivated them. And what they're teaching their national security professionals now is to focus on the behavior, and it doesn't matter what the reason is. But it does matter, because if you only focus on the behavior, you can't catch it in its early stages. And you've seen that in this particular attack, where the FBI twice had this guy. Twice. He was brought to their attention because he was bragging to coworkers that he had friends in Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, He had contact with a suicide bomber. He was in a program, I can't remember the exact name of it, but there was a program that was called Fundamentalist something or other that was led by a terrorist affiliate, and they knew all this. But because they aren't identifying the ideology as the enemy, unless you are a card-carrying member of a known terrorist organization, or you have committed actual violence, they let you go. And I'll just want to add one more thing. I know I'm talking a lot, but
no, please. That's why you're on the air.
The Department of Homeland Security also had a program where they were surveilling radical mosques, and the mosque he attended was one of them. And by the way, Hillary Clinton had that dismantled, so that program is no longer in effect. And the manipulation and censorship of language is really a problem that it starts with political correctness, but it doesn't end there. It's not just designed to make people feel better and touchy-feely and we're all be nice to each other. It spills over into policies that actually wind up endangering all Americans, including Muslim Americans. So it's a big problem.
Yeah, and you know what's absolutely wild here? I've been to Israel a good number of times. Anyone that's traveled to Israel, say with on El Al Airlines, they're number one in security in the world. They have to deal with this day and night, and they have to do all kinds of things to look at potential racial profiling and all kinds of. Now, if you're not guilty, you'll get through. You'll make it in without a problem. But if there's a problem, and everyone on that plane, they want to make sure, fine, I'll go through the extra scrutiny and make me feel uncomfortable. Even I'm going to Israel for a friend's wedding. I don't mind because that's what security does. President Obama has now lashed out at Donald Trump, not by name, but speaking about yapping from politicians who tweet, saying, quote, "We're now seeing how dangerous this kind of mindset and this kind of thinking can be. We're starting to see where this kind of rhetoric and loose talk and sloppiness about who exactly we're fighting, where this can lead us." And he said, so if he uses terms like radical Islamic terrorism, what exactly would using this language accomplish? What exactly would it change? And he said, we're seeing that it could lead to further attacks. So explain this to me. Explain this to me. Here, a Muslim man slaughters other Americans, right? And now President Obama is saying that if we use the right terms, it's going to lead to more attacks on Muslims? This is completely upside down.
Well, I would argue that it's the other way around.
Of course.
He's the president. He's the one who's been avoiding this language, and now we see what it leads to. Donald Trump hasn't implemented any policies. The administration's national security apparatus is not in sync with Donald Trump's views, and I'm not sitting here to advocate for Donald Trump, but since the president blamed everything on him and his use of language, I will just say that, it was practically random that President Obama blamed Donald Trump and his language. Let's leave Trump out of it. You just identify. What he's saying is that if you properly identify the enemy, then you'll reap the consequences. What he is doing, since you asked me to explain it, is he's confusing cause with effect. If you name the enemy, there's a terrorist attack, and then you name it for what it is, and then there's another one, you can't say, oh, it was our fault because we properly named it. Islamic terrorism was around way a long time ago before anybody knew what it was called. So it's kind of like a housewife who's beaten up, and when her husband beats her, blames herself for whatever she did. It's all backwards. It's all backwards. For him to say what difference it makes a difference. If you want to know who the enemy is, you have to understand what their goals are, what's motivating them, where you can find them, what they're thinking. Otherwise, this is not going to be, it's not a bunch of isolated coincidences.
Yeah, well said on every front. Deborah, so if folks go to vigilancenow.org, is that the best place to go, or any of your books? What if people want to read more, find out more, because you articulate these things so clearly, and you just have to think, what is the administration thinking? What are people thinking? This is so obvious, but we're out of time. What's the best way for people to get more of your work in their hands?
Yeah, my website isn't updated because I have no help. So the best way to look me up is to type in my name, DeborahWeiss, and Sharia. If you put Sharia, a lot of my work will come up. But you can contact me through my website, and I will get it if you have, another radio show or whatever. So, and the book that I would say now is Council on American Islamic Relations, published by CFNS, and also the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. You can find it on Amazon. And that's it. I'm writing another one now, but we can talk about that next time.
Awesome. And in point of fact, Deborah, you don't complain about the work that you do, but this is nothing you went looking for. This is something that kind of found you, and you felt that you have to address it. So thanks for the work. I know it's sacrificial. Keep it up, and look forward to speaking with you again. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the great work you do on your show.